Hello everyone, I'm Mark, and this is Several Books. So today who we're looking at is William Gaddis. He's the author of 5 fairly significant works in American postmodernism. He was active from about 1955 until I think it's 2001. Most of his works are epics, so when you have most of your works and it's only 5, it's not exactly a huge list. His 3 epic novels are The Recognitions, J.R., and A Frolic of His Own. I've read all 5 of his works. There is a collection of his letters that came out, and I believe a collection of essays that he wrote that came out as well. I have not read either of those. To start with William Gaddis, we're going to be looking at The Recognitions, his first novel, and we'll go in chronological order, followed by a brief summary. So, The Recognitions, I love my copy because I love the painting on the front. I've read, like I said, all 5 of William Gaddis' novels. This is one I read probably close to 10 or 15 years ago. I read it shortly after college, I believe it was. The book is essentially, well, all Gaddis works are essentially built on the ideas of fraud. And so what we see most often is intellectual dishonesty. In The Recognitions, we see that there's an instance in the novel where a playwright is writing a play in a hotel room, and he misplaces the play, and his housekeeper comes in, and she speaks Spanish, and he says, "Donde la playa? Donde está la playa?" And he's saying playa because he doesn't know Spanish, and what he's saying is play, just like you don't know Spanish, so you add a to the end of every word, and suddenly it's Spanish. And the housekeeper is wondering how the guy lost a whole beach in his hotel room. And I feel like that kind of sums up all of William Gaddis's work in a way. He's so confident in his lack of knowledge, and everybody around him is seeing that he's an intellectual fraud. The book opens with an epigraph from Goethe's Faust. And it's significant also that it's opening with an epigraph of Goethe's Faust because the book is a Faustian bargain. The book opens with some stuff about counterfeiters, but Wyatt Gwyn, the principal character, eventually grows up and tries to become a painter, and he makes a bargain with a man named Rectal Brown, ha-ha-hee-hee. And essentially what Wyatt's going to be doing is forging famous paintings. So I don't have a huge amount to say about the book because I did read it a long time ago, and some of it escapes me. It's 1,000 pages, just about 960, I believe. So rereading it just for the video, at least at this point in the channel's lifetime, doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But what I'm going to say is that there are songs, there is great description, and there's great dialogue. When the novel came out, it was not widely recognized by critics as a masterpiece. A book called Fire the Bastards was eventually written about the reception Gaddis received when he wrote this book. It truly was one of a kind when it came out. And it's a wonderful book. So I remember parts of it as I just summarized, but to give a overarching view of this, you've got priests who are worshiping the sun. You've got great concert writers who are bringing down churches with their playing of organs, and you've got a man named Wyatt Gwyn whose name eventually disappears from the text, forging classic paintings. So a wonderful book. I don't have anything else to say about it except that it's S tier. I hope that that's sufficient considering what we're doing here and just going through the different books. So this was a huge work for me when I was younger, and it remains probably my favorite of the big, giant postmodern tomes. 1,000 pages devoted to Wyatt Gwyn. Our second novel is J.R., and I tried to read J.R. 2 or 3 times, finding it a fairly quick read in the beginning, and for whatever reason, after getting a start, I ended up abandoning the novel. More recently, I finished all 5 of William Gaddis's novels. So here we've got J.R., and I like my copy. It's a Knopf copy. It's old, used. Unlike the Recognitions, J.R. is essentially entirely dialogue. There are occasional asides where Gaddis steps in to describe something, but yeah, it's pretty much all dialogue. In the work, we see a bunch of different satirizations of intellectualism. There's a school, and the school's motto is written in ancient Greek. I don't know a whole lot about ancient Greek, but if you look into this, the ancient Greek inscription turns out to be nonsense. It's not actually words, it's just Greek letters stuck next to each other. And that kind of sums up this work as well. This work is kind of about capitalism run amok, the desire to accrue profit, and the way that we're turning schools into centers to inculcate that ethos. Now, the distinctions about J.R. are that the book, I believe, is based on the Rheingold, the Wagner opera, and we do see that specifically mentioned in the text. And J.R., he's not really the main character, but the eponymous character, who the book is named after, is a 12-year-old boy, in other words, a dwarf or gnome of some sort, who is obsessed with gaining wealth. Now, he gains wealth by essentially investing in penny stocks and selling everything he can find in the backs of magazines. And what he does is he turns in the accrual of these worthless goods. I believe it's like forks or spoons from the Navy is how he gets his start, into a gigantic empire, working with everything from legal marijuana to stock exchange and various other goods. The book is told primarily in dialogue, as I said. There's very little description of scene, and sometimes it's difficult to follow who the character is that's speaking. That said, if you work with the book and you trust that eventually things will become clearer, we do get more information about those characters, and we do begin to understand who characters are, and you can even make mental images of them. The real primary character of the novel is a music teacher at the school where they're surprisingly performing an opera. And that music teacher is eventually fired. I forget the circumstances under which he's fired, but it adds to the drama. I would describe the book, or I would rate the book as another S-tier book. This is his second novel, and it's a wonderful novel. It does take a bit to work through, figuring out who is speaking at different times and so on and so forth. But as I said, if you stick with it, you normally figure it out pretty quickly. Aside from that, if the book is almost entirely dialogue, means that the reading of the book, despite that the dialogue may take up gigantic pages with speeches, if you stick with the dialogue, it goes pretty quickly. So I read this book in a couple of days. I thought it was great. I couldn't really put it down once I finally did sit down and get to it. And no disappointments, and I worked right through. Gaddis's third novel is Carpenter's Gothic. Carpenter's Gothic, as you can see, my copy has the Great Books Foundation logo there saying that it's worth reading. This is essentially about investments in Africa gone awry and how a veteran, invested in Africa, and I think it was some kind of coup ends up taking place involving religious figures. The book is curious. It's almost entirely dialogue, and so it's difficult sometimes to get a real sense of where the characters are talking. You know, it all takes place in a house. You don't know which room they're in necessarily, and you're not always certain kind of the atmosphere. The types of speeches that are happening can be very intense and theatrical. What I would say, though, is that despite the book's brevity, it's fairly deep. There's a lot that you can take from this. I'm going to say the book is about a B. So it's a good book. It's not my favorite book. It's certainly not bad, but it's nothing spectacular. That the Great Books Foundation has recommended it means that if you read it and you're trying to read things that not everybody knows about, you're probably going to have a great book that by an author that everybody respects, and some type of obscurity under your belt. Gaddis' fourth novel is A Frolic of His Own. And A Frolic of His Own is his last epic. As I said, there are only 5 novels here, and this video will be a little bit shorter because of it. But A Frolic of His Own was quite a fun read for me. I read this one likewise fairly quickly. This book is primarily about a court case, a lawsuit. And what has happened is that a writer has taken certain speeches of his Civil War epic drama from classic works of literature, most notably Plato. And he's included these speeches in his book, rewritten for his themes, but they're essentially the same speeches. And what happens is that he eventually comes to see another play or film, I think the case is. And in the film, he notices certain similarities to his own work. And so what we're getting very strongly is the idea that everything has already been said that can be said, and we're simply rehashing old ideas, where he's seeing plagiarism in a work that's wholly original. What happens is that he has obtained copyright for his work by mailing himself the play. That's something that used to be done before we had internet access to everything and so on. If a person wanted to copyright a play, what they would do is mail it to themselves, and you'd have a postmark date on the envelope. And since it was from the U.S. government, it was considered basically solid. So he's done that, and we do get segments of court reflections. We get papers, court documents. But other than that, the book is largely dialogue. And a lot of what the dialogue comes down to is his lawyers and so forth, and family. So we don't actually meditate too much on the specific writer. This is not as good as his other S-tier books, but the fact is that it's so much better than so many other books that I'm going to give this an S tier as well. The other option is that I say it's an A tier book. So it's either an A tier or an S tier book. We can make it A tier if that makes you happy. But this is a great novel. It's not as good as his most famous books, but if you've read one or the other, JR or the Recognitions, it's worth looking into. The final novel that William Gaddis wrote is Agape Agape, and that is a short book. Here that is. Now, my opinion of this book is that it's just kind of not worth it. I understand people go through the book and there is a site devoted to piecing out all of the allusions in the book. I read this book, and I was reading Bernhard at the time, so I read Bernhard, I read this, I read more Bernhard, and it's very clear that the book is modeled after Bernhard's monologues. That said, in my opinion, it's not as good as his monologues. So I know people love this book. I don't have a huge amount to say about it, but it just doesn't quite stack up to the competition. So I'm going to say that this is a C+. Gaddis still has an amazing record with 1 C+, 1 B, 1 A, and 2 S's. But you can read this book in an afternoon. It's a dramatic monologue, and there's not a whole lot else to say about it. One thing that Bernhard does is oftentimes in his monologues, he's grounding the work in a further story. So if you look at The Cone, for instance, I think it's called The Cone. Bernhard has a novel about a conic structure. And we're getting through the dialogue and repetition, the monologue and repetition, we're getting more and more information about the construction of this gigantic conic structure for the architect's sister or whatever. And I mention this because of the 5 or so Bernhard novels that I've read, this one is considered like one of the best. And there is a clear story in the book. Now, the way it's related is kind of piecemeal and out of order because it's a monologue. But it's just necessary that I mention this because Bernhard, for instance, in Wittgenstein's Nephew, we've got a real story there. The story is the story of a suicide. And we don't really get a real story in Agape Agape. Much of what we're really getting is simply the monologue and the philosophic digression. Okay, so this is a shorter video than most of the full author reads I'm going to do, and I'm thinking of beginning to do some more editorial videos. What I'm probably going to do is make a video about reading off of the algorithm. And why I'm doing that is because I noticed at least a few months ago there were a number of people on BookTube complaining that all of the books that people were reading on BookTube were the same books. Now, my books so far that I reviewed aren't necessarily wholly unique from the algorithm. That said, for instance, I'm reading French literature right now, a book that is available in English, but I have read French novels that are not available in English. And I've read French novels that are super famous in France that aren't super famous in the US. And so what I'm trying to say is that my own reading habits are not wholly unique from the algorithm, but similar to the idea that my taste in books is somewhat similar to the BookTube Lit Bro. I'm definitely slightly different as well. And what I want to do is point out certain tactics that a person can take to their book consumption that will ensure that they're reading something that isn't necessarily unknown, but also that is maybe different than what everybody else on the internet seems to be reading. So again, I haven't gotten super into my books that are very obscure, There are a few. I'm not somebody who resides in rampant obscurity, though. But if you look at the collection of the books that I read, I think you'll see a number of things that are just slightly different than what a lot of people are reading online. Alright, guys. I've been Mark, and this is Several Books. Thanks for everything, and you have a great day. Bye-bye.